Okay. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He's to be feared above all gods. I think that's safe to say. But we just have to determine which Lord we're talking about. Because there's many lords. I find there's many gods even in the Old Testament. Many pictures of God. And there's many pictures of God I've found out in the New Testament. Many pictures of God, different pictures. They're not the same. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. But once again, I have come to the conclusion that, where 2 or 3 are gathered, then there's a great possibility that the power of God will be manifest. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for the resurrection power. You're looking for the miracle working power of God. If you're just playing church, if you're just playing religion, that doesn't mean anything. If it's just a little belief you have and no power, well, it really doesn't add up to very much. It doesn't mean much. People believe this and they believe that, but they don't have any power. They need power. Somebody might say, well, I don't need any power. Of course you do. Of course you do. In the end, you'll need it. Because we age. And so God can reverse your aging process. That's what you need. That's what you really need. At least that's what I want. Some people don't care. Maybe some people, well, there are definitely people that don't care about that. I don't know what they care about. But, some people will say they don't want to live forever. Well, fine. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. Then we find people still live after they die, so there they be. There they be still alive somewhere in some other reality, some alternate reality, a spirit reality. But we can't seem to get any definite idea of what's going on. There's so many different stories. There's so many different experiences that people claim to have. But like I say, the bottom line is where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, Jesus said, there I am in the midst. In other words, there is the Spirit of God. Possibly. He didn't say possibly, but I'm saying it. Because, you can get together with some people and then there's no presence. There's no manifestation of God. There's no power. And I believe it's because the people that are there are not serious about God. They're not really seriously seeking God. They don't have the doctrine of God. They don't understand the doctrine of God. They don't spend any time seeking God. And so it's hypocritical. And so you're not going to get any manifestation. I mean, that's the best I can come up with. I have some amazing, this message, I have the most amazing information. I have the most amazing material in this message. Well, from now on until I finish. Because I'm not going to get through all of it today, but this is the ultimate amazing material. It's just fascinating to say the least. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-boggling. It's puzzling. So here we go. Daniel 7, 9 through 10. I just forgot this verse before. I didn't include it. I didn't go over this verse at the beginning. For some reason, I just didn't include it. So I want to read it, these 2 verses. Number 9, I watched until the thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days sat. So this is supposed to be the God, the true God, the only God, the Most High, the Supreme God, the most powerful being that there is, whose robe was white as snow. So in this case, this account of God is really different than any other account in some ways. So this time it says, this is Daniel, and this was when he was in Babylon, when they were taken away into Babylon. So they didn't even have a temple. They weren't even doing any sacrificing or anything. So this vision of God, he had a robe that was white as snow, and then it says, and the hair of his head like pure wool. And this was copied into the book of, I'm going to abbreviate it from now on and say the book of Rev. Because I don't really believe it's revelation. I believe it's just plagiarism. But this account is used in the book of Revelation. The whole thing is this material, these 2 verses, is used in the book of Revelation, the book of Rev. So the hair of his head was like pure wool, so it was white hair, whatever. His throne was like flames of fire. So in this case, they're saying, or Daniel is saying, that his throne was a flame of fire. And then it says, and his wheels like burning fire. Now the wheels would be the same as we find in Ezekiel. And it's all a mystery. Nobody knows what that really is. But, you know, it was supposed to be a spaceship. It was supposed to be some kind of a... I mean, that's what people believe. Because what else are they going to believe? It's some kind of machine, we believe. But it's spoken of a lot in the book of Ezekiel, in those mysterious visions that he saw. But and here we have it, and it was never associated with God. Now it's being associated with the Most High God. The Ancient of Days is one of his names. And then verse 10, again we see the fire. We see that God in the Old Testament is a flame of fire. A stream of fire went out and came out from before him. So he literally is able to, he's like a flamethrower, like I said last week. And he's like a fire being. He's like a fire machine, a living fire machine, and he spits fire, he shoots fire. Go figure. And then period, that's the end of that. That's all they tell you. And then this was used, this next part is used in the book of Rev. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set and the books were opened. So like I say, that's in the book of Rev. All right, so now I included the this verse right here, Numbers 16:19, because we're going to read the amazing account of Korah and move that up. And I just wanted to put this verse in here. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them being Moses and Aaron, he gathered all the congregation against them to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the only reason I included this is because it shows you that they all saw, I don't know how 1 million people could be there, but there was a large group. We don't know the details of how many were there. But it says all the congregation. And they were gathered at the tabernacle, and they all saw the glory of the Lord. So, right away I want to say, I don't know how they could have ever thought that they could manipulate God, that they could change the will of God or attack the servant of God, the servants of God, Moses and Aaron and anybody else that was with them. How in the world could they have ever believed that they could do such a thing? It really doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, things were strange back then, so maybe they were that crazy. But I don't see it. I don't see it logically. So before I read that account, again, I want to go back to the verses that I read before about how Jesus presented a God that loved his enemies. And I went over a bunch of verses with that, and it showed you not the God of the Old Testament, because it's a different God. It's not the same God. Not if you use the Bible. Not if you believe what's in the Bible. If you believe what's in the Bible, then it's a different God. But you're left with the unknown. It's just an unknown. I mean, we really know more about the aliens that live in the earth than we do about God, the God of the Bible. At least we know the aliens live. They live inside the earth. But God, we don't even know where he is. And, they have appeared, those aliens have appeared to people on multiple occasions. But God, I don't really think he's appeared to that many people through the centuries. There's not that many accounts of it. But yet, he's still there. But yet, I mean, he does appear in a sense. His spirit, you have a manifestation of power, invisible power. But you don't see anything physical, is what I'm saying. The aliens, at least, they have seen physical beings, you might say. Many of them are androids, I believe. Like little, they call them grays, the little grays. I think those are androids. And so they're controlled by other beings, and then those beings could be controlled by other beings. But at least they've seen and they've interacted with these physical beings. But we don't see any physical beings. And God doesn't even talk to people in words. He talks in an atmosphere. He talks in like an atmosphere. If I pray and I'm praying correctly or whatever, I'll feel an atmosphere of God. And God, it's like God is saying, yeah, I like what you're doing lately, or what you ask yourself, well, why is he doing that? And then you say, well, I'm doing something different. There must be why he's manifesting himself. And I think it's true, but still, he doesn't speak clearly words to us. Unless somebody has like a healing ministry, And then God is like speaking to them. And they never explain how that happens. But obviously they get words from God. He tells them about different people who need a healing. And then it just comes into his mind, into the person's mind. But they never explain that. No. They're not going to tell you anything about that. People that have that ability. No. But getting back to the fact that Jesus really believed these verses here, these 5, well, it's really 6 verses. Jesus really believed that God, his God, was loving his enemies. And he was telling us that we need to love our enemies. And I believe that's a good principle. And I think we should practice it as much as possible. But in many cases, it's not possible. Because the enemy is insane. And you can't negotiate with insane people. It's like the wars that are going on right now. There's insane people behind them. They're insane. They're not sane. You can't negotiate with a person who is filled with fear and hate. There's no negotiation. There's no way of loving them because they have no love in them. I guess you could say that. Let me read it. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And I went over this, and it doesn't even say hate your enemy. It says kill your enemy in the Old Testament. But I say to you, love your enemies. So he's saying, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. That's all good and well. I think it should be done. But then there's, like I say, many cases. So that you yourselves may be the children of your Father who is in heaven. Oh, as if the Father loves his enemies all the time. Right? Because it doesn't say, it never says in any of this, if it be possible, if you can do it, do it. No, it just says do it. So that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. And I went over this, and that doesn't really mean much. Rain and sun, that doesn't mean much. But he's still trying to make the argument that God is blessing his enemies. He's still saying, this is the premise of this passage. And then it says in verse 46, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not the tax collectors practice the same thing? Well, I don't know if the tax collectors have anything to do with it. But once again, he's trying to convince people that you have to love your enemies or you're not going to get a reward. Okay? But he's claiming that God does that because he says that at the end. So he's claiming you're not going to get any reward unless you love your enemies. And then it says, and if you salute your family or your brothers only, what have you done that is extraordinary? This is the faithful version. Why do we have to do extraordinary? Why do we have to do extraordinary things? We just want to do the right thing. Once again, he brings up tax collectors. Do not the tax collectors practice the same thing? I don't know what he's talking about. But then the last line is important. Therefore, be perfect. So he's saying, even as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. Well, if we do what the God of the Old Testament, it's supposed to be the God of the Old Testament. He believed, he said, don't make my Father's temple or my Father's house a place of merchandise. He really believed that his Father, but then at one point he said he was greater than the temple. Well, that makes no sense. But he really believed that his Father was the God of the temple, the God of Moses, right? So he believed it, but then he spoke things that were the opposite of what's in the Old Testament. Oh, yeah. But he's saying that God is loving his enemies, and that's why he's perfect. Okay? But then we look in the Old Testament, and he did not love his enemies. He killed them. He burned them up. He burned them. He torched them. He incinerated them. He destroyed them. He was constantly, any people that were rebelling against his doctrine, his commandments, he was killing them. He was not loving them. No, that is not true. And I'm going to read just right now, I'm going to read the prime example of that, the most incredible example of that in the entire book, entire Old Testament. So here we are, Numbers 16, 25 through 35. There's 10 verses. And Moses rose up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. I'll give you some background information on this. He had wanted them to come up. A lot was going on. And those particular people, Dathan and Abiram, were with Korah. Korah was the one, I think he was the ringleader. But these two people, Dathan and Abiram, were also prominent. And they were smart because, so Moses sort of deceived a lot of these people too, because he said to all these elders, he said, bring a fire pan for incense and come up, as if that was going to solve the problem or something. And then God ended up killing them all. So they were thinking they followed his instructions, but these two people did not. Okay? And that's why it's saying here that Moses rose up and went to them. So obviously they were a ways away, because he asked them, will you come up? And they said, no, we will not come up to you. But it didn't work because Moses went to them. So obviously they were a short distance away. They weren't right near there, but they were, who knows? They don't tell you exactly how far away they were from the tabernacle where Moses lived, Moses' tent. But obviously, come up is what they said. So obviously there was a little bit of a distance. There was a certain distance. So it clearly says here that the elders of Israel followed him as he went to where they were located. But I said they were smart because the other ones were fools. They came up. And there's so much to here to read. I'm not going to read all the entire story, but, and then it goes on, he says, and he spoke to the congregation saying, I ask you, get away from the tents of these wicked men. So there was a bunch of people that were not going to be killed. Eventually, about, I think it's 15,000 people were killed by God later, which we'll get to. But he was going to have them be sucked down into the underground. That's one way of putting it. So he wanted them to get away from the tents of these two people, Dathan, Abiram, and the other guy, Korah, and his family, and everybody. So it says in 27, so they got away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. So they moved away. They were smart enough, right, those people. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood in the door of the tents, and their wives, and their sons, and their little children. So this is a large group of people. And the parents, Dathan and Abiram, Korah, were the ones who were rebelling. They were sinning, but we find that all the other people ended up getting killed too. A lot of people got killed. They paid the price for the sins of their parents. They paid the price. And I always bring that one verse up, which I thought was the Word of God, but it doesn't agree. I mean, there's nothing really agrees, because he said, do not kill, and then he's killing. Well, he said, do not kill, and then he commanded them to kill. In this case, he's going to do the killing himself. In verse 28, and Moses said, by this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that I have not done them from my own heart. They kept blaming him as if he was doing these things. Verse 29, right here. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they are visited according to the fate of all men, in other words, a natural death, the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new creation, that's one way of putting it, and the earth opens her mouth and swallows them up with all that they have, and they go down alive into the pit, then you shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And I'm not sure why God was so angry at these people, because they were complaining. I'm not sure if I have the verse here. I might be lower. But they just came to Moses, those people, and they had said, you're taking too much upon yourself. We're holy. I think I read that last week. We're holy, and we're spiritual too, and we know what's going on. Okay. So what's the big deal? So good for you. I don't see any violence. I didn't see any violence. I didn't see them trying to hurt them or anything. Maybe that's what they had planned on doing. Maybe they were going to do them harm. But it doesn't say anything about that. And they maybe, we don't know what tone they had. But obviously, God was very angry at them for what they were doing. So then, immediately after that was said, verse 31, and it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and all the men who were for Korah, and all their goods. The whole thing just split apart, and they all went down, and who knows how deep. We really don't know. Did they go down 1,000 feet? Did they go down 100 feet? Did they go down 6 feet? We really don't know anything, except that it says in verse 33, they and all that they had went down alive into the pit. And then it says, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. So then the earth closed back up. So it split around them, and everything that they had and all that they had, the whole families and everything, right down into the earth, underground. And then it closed back up again. Completely closed back up, apparently. That's what it says. Verse 34, and all Israel around them fled at their cry. So when they started to go down to the earth, they were all screaming. All the women especially were screaming. And I'm sure the men were screaming too. But they didn't expect that. And that's rude. That is mean, boy. That is brutal. That's brutal is what that is. All of them. They're supposed to be the children of Abraham, right? Well, they were buried alive, these people. There didn't seem to be any negotiation, no mercy at all for any of these people, all the children and the wives and what have you. And then, so it says, all Israel fled, they just ran, since they were afraid the earth might swallow them up also. I think I changed that. Boy, I just really enjoyed changing the language to a nice, simple sentence, because there's so many things that are written. I say, and behold, you don't even need that statement, and behold. So, 35, and there came out a fire from the Lord. There's that fire again, the flamethrower, and burned up the 250 men who offered incense. See, there was 250 men that Moses told them to come and bring their incense pans, and you put the incense in them. They call them a fire pan in some versions. And he told them to do that, and they probably believed that somehow that was going to help the situation. No, they were killed. They were burned alive. They were burned to death by God. He didn't anything but loving his enemies. That was total hating of his enemies, total destruction of his enemies. I mean, brutal destruction, total wipeout, just burned to ashes. Well, we don't really know the extent of the burning, because at one point when God burned sons of Aaron, he burned those two. He doesn't burn them to ashes, he just burns them, and then whatever's left has to be removed. Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. So the 250, they were the leaders. They were all the leaders of the whole group, the whole Israel. Massive amount of people, 1 point something million people at least, that was part of the group. And these were the leaders. These were the ones that were supposedly anointed, and they were priests, apparently. Doesn't go into detail about them, but... And he killed them all. He burned them. They weren't even his enemies. They weren't even his enemies. They were supposed to be his friends, right? So not only did he not love his enemies, he didn't love his friends either. You know, that really doesn't make any sense. you know. I can't see them fighting that hard against God that he was going to do that to them, but he did it. He did it anyway. He did it to them. He did it to them anyway. So they were all dead. So I included this next verse here because it's the same thing as above, and it just shows you that they all could constantly see the power of God. So I don't know why you would find them rebelling that much, but apparently they were. I mean, you have to assume that what they're saying is correct. It's Numbers 16:42, and it came to pass when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, see, they were gathered against them. They all looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and the cloud covered it. So the cloud was there, and the glory of the Lord appeared. So there was no such thing as, where is God? I don't see him anywhere. No, he was very clearly seen. He was total supernatural manifestation. So then a few verses down, I took another 9. This completes it. These were necessary, these verses right here. Number 16, same chapter, 41 through 50. But on the next day, this is after he burned the 250 priests, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Well, God did. So those were the people of the Lord. They were. He killed them. He burned them. He burned them all to death. That makes no sense. Oh, this story really, it just doesn't add up that these people would be that foolish to challenge God. I suppose they could have been that stupid, I suppose. I suppose it's possible. We see a lot of stupid people even now, these days. Extremely stupid. Just no brains, just brainless. Absolutely mindless. Okay? So maybe these people were totally brainless. You know? But, you know, they couldn't, these other people maybe they were normal. They said, you know, what's going on here? You killed the people of the Lord. All they knew is that they went up to where Moses was and they all were killed. And that's all they knew. I mean, you're talking about, 1.5 or 1.7 million people. It was hard to see what was going on, really. And it came to pass when the congregation was gathered together against Moses and against Aaron, they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it. This is what I mean, the way it says, and behold, right? You can get rid of this, right? And this reads a lot easier. So they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and the cloud covered it. No kidding. And the glory of the Lord appeared. See, so they saw the glory of God. Verse 43, and Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from this congregation, so that I may consume them as in a moment." And they fell upon their faces. That was Moses and Aaron. But you see, God did not negotiate with them. He says, "Oh, what's the problem? What do you need? We'll give you whatever you want. I'll provide everything you want." No, God didn't do that. God did not, he wasn't willing to please them, apparently. He wasn't going to give them all that they ever wanted. No, he was going to kill them if they apparently they weren't doing what he wanted. Verse 46, and Moses said to Aaron, take a censer and put fire in it from the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly into the congregation and make an atonement for them. So they needed an atonement because they had sinned, supposedly, apparently. For wrath has gone out from the Lord. So somehow Moses knew that wrath had gone out from God. Because then it says, the plague has begun. So God just released his killing power, his highly efficient killing ability, and killing force. Like he killed all the firstborn in Egypt. If you watch the Ten Commandments, they redid that so it's in high definition. At one point they show it's like a black kind of a creeping cloud creeping into Egypt, creeping into the city, and that was what was going to kill all the firstborn. It was like almost like a cloud, kind of a black cloud, and it was moving on the surface of the earth, and that's what took him out. And so here he created a plague. We're not told what it is. We're not told what kind of disease it is or anything like that. Verse 47, and Aaron did as Moses commanded, right here, and ran into the midst of the congregation. See, Aaron was supposed to do this. And behold, the plague had begun among the people. And he put on incense and made an atonement for the people. Okay, that's good, right? And he stood between the dead and the living. So he was like a mediator in this case, Aaron. Because he was doing the work of providing the atonement. Moses commanded him, but he did it. So he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed or stopped. So that's really what it should say. I couldn't even find that in any of the versions. You know? That's what it should say. And the plague was stopped. Okay? Because in reality, if it stayed, then it would stay there. That's terrible. Old language, terrible. Horrible. The plague was stayed. In other words, it stayed a plague. No, it was stopped. And this is supposed to be modern language. This is supposed to be a modern version, translation. And they didn't do that good of a job. In many, many cases. So, a couple more verses. And those who died in the plague were 14,700. Wow. Beside the ones who died about the matter of Korah. And Aaron returned to Moses to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the plague was stopped. But before that happened, close to 15,000 people were killed by an unknown disease. They don't tell you what kind of, how they died, how quickly they died, what kind of death it was, what kind of disease it was. No information whatsoever is given. And so why were all these people killed? You know, they're just people. That's all. Just being led out there by God into the wilderness. It was supposed to be, you know, they were going to be brought to some kind of a utopia, promised land, land flowing of milk and honey. And then instead, they got wiped out. And so next week I'm going to talk about how in the wilderness they were looking for water. They didn't have any water. And it's a strange story, again, very strange. It's in its own right, it's very strange. And Aaron supposedly did something wrong, but they don't even tell you what it was, and then God killed him. But then you find out there's two accounts of his death. We don't even have a clear idea of how he died. There's two different accounts. And that's interesting. And the account doesn't make any sense because we're not given, once again, we're not given all of the information about what went on. You know, so we're told this and the other, and then they say, well, how come? Well, you don't get to know that.